My favorite era of design sketches is the 50s and the 60s, and that's because you can see so much emotion and expression in them. You could tell that the designers had a lot of fun creating these design concepts, and it feels like they had less of a restraint on their creative ideas than we see in today's world. These sketches, for example, are from GM designer Carl Renner, but my personal favorite style of this time has to be the sketches of designer Dick Rusin. I love the exaggerated perspective and colorful sheets of paper. It really grabs the attention of the observer, and they all have a clear focal point, so you know what area of the car he wants you to focus on when you look at his sketches. Another favorite of mine is George Krispinski and his illustration style sketching. Here's an example of a 1958 Plymouth Fury sketch of his, and this is just a beautiful piece of art. For rendering style, I really admire Homer Lagasse and his attention to details and skills in creating amazing reflections such as this awesome van here and highlights in his sketches. How's it going? Welcome back to the channel. It's of course the Sketch Monkey here, and in this video we're going to go back to a time when I'm not sure if the car manufacturers tried to make them look like boats or airplanes. And that would be the 1950s, and more specifically we're going to take a look at the 1959 Cadillac DeVille and redesign that into something that could be built today.
There is its clean, graceful symmetry of line and the protection provided by its many safety features. Every window of every Cadillac is safety plate glass.
Sparkling chrome emphasizes Cadillac's sleekly curved new Vista panoramic windshield that offers front, top, and side vision totally unapproached by conventional windshield design.
Before I jump into something digital, I like to get a feel for the car I'm going to sketch and redesign, and just to get a feel for the proportions and the overall feeling of the car, the style of that era that we're going to sketch. And I do that by just picking up the pen, a cup of coffee, and a sheet of print paper. I'm going to use 2 markers for this quick sketch here. And it's a good way to warm up before you jump into the creative process of redesigning this car, is to sketch the car you're going to redesign just as it is, to understand all the elements that go into this style. When I sketch like this, I do have a reference picture up on the screen that I'm using to copy and try to get the proportions down first of all. And once the proportions are down, you can start to add the line weight, and if you have a couple of markers, you can add that as well. But the key thing here is to not try to make an illustration or not try to make this a perfect looking sketch. The idea with this initial sketch is to just warm up your hand and get started, pretty much fire up your brain creatively before going into the main redesign of this car. So I'm going to show you this process from blank sheet of paper to initial sketch, and once we're done with this, we're jumping into Photoshop and get started with the redesign of the 59 Cadillac Coupe DeVille. Now before we get into the sketching part, just make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. That way you get notified when new videos are uploaded every single week. The first Cadillac Coupe DeVille was shown during the 1949 Motorama, and the name DeVille itself comes from the French de la ville, which means of the town. And to me, this means that this car was more angled towards cruising around town in comfort and style. The 1959 Cadillac Coupe DeVille is easily recognizable for its huge, sharp fins with the dual bullet taillights, two distinctive roof lines and roof pillar configurations, the jewel-like grille patterns, and the matching deck lid beauty panels. It was powered by a V8 producing 325 horsepower, and standard equipment included power brakes, power steering, auto transmission, backup lamps, 2-speed wipers, vanity mirrors, power windows, and two-way power seats. The rear wheels, as you can see here, are covered by side skirts, and a 4-door option was available in either 4-window or 6-window hardtop configurations. In 1959, Cadillac sold over 53,000 DeVilles, and that accounted for about 37% of all Cadillacs sold that year. The restyling for the 1960s Coupe DeVille had a more smooth and restrained styling. The fins were smaller, less chrome trim overall, and the new front grille and bumper. It's kind of interesting to see the evolution of the Coupe DeVille through the decades, from the 50s with the crazy fins all the way to the 80s, and how the fins and roundness of the car became more and more sharp with hard edges and lines, as you can see right here. The car was restyled and facelifted once again in 1961, with major changes being made to the front fascia and the removal of the wraparound windshield, which I personally think was a really cool design feature. Throughout 1961 to 64, the Coupe DeVille only saw minor changes in its design, and styling-wise it stayed pretty much the same. 1964 was the first year that the DeVille convertible, and overall the model accounted for almost 2/3 of all Cadillacs sold in 1964. The sharper lines and design of the Coupe DeVille was introduced in 1965. The era of large fins and extreme proportions were starting to become a thing of the past, and was slowly replaced with sleeker lines and sharper edges. 1970 was the last year that DeVille offered a convertible body style, and it was also the last model year for pillared sedans until hardtops were permanently dropped in 1977. The car was again redesigned in 1971 and kept the same style of design up until 1980, when a major refresh was made with a more aerodynamic nose, higher tail end, and an overall heavier appearance. In 1989, Cadillac did a complete remake of the DeVille with a longer wheelbase, and although the interior was still the same as the previous model year, the exterior saw a major redesign. The era of muscle cars and race to the top of power output among manufacturers was over, and even though the DeVille still had a big 4.5 V8 up front, it only produced 155 horsepower, and that's something that would be unthinkable with today's standards of small engines with turbos. The 1993 was the last year of Cadillac's 6-passenger Coupe DeVille. This layout wasn't selling as well any longer, and in 1994 it was replaced by 2 4-door models. The last and 8th generation of the DeVille ran from 2000 to 2005. By this time, there's not much left design-wise to connect it to the crazy styling of the 50s and the 60s, and to me it just looks like a bland, boring car without any personality. The name DeVille was replaced in 2006 with the Cadillac's DTS, which is short for DeVille Touring Sedan. This was part of a revamp of the branding of Cadillac, where all models received a short 3-letter name, such as the Seville now being called the STS and the Catera the CTS, which by the way was an Opel Omega. Alright, so talking about this redesign here, this is the first 50s cars I ever made, so this is a super fun challenge for me to try and modernize the whole style of this era. And I wanted to do that specifically by keeping the fins. The fins are the most important part of this redesign, and I want to make them more modern. So how do we do that? Well, the thing I did was to implement the LEDs into the graphic features that are already existing on the 59 model. So for example, we have these fins and we have the end of them. To me, that would be a perfect spot to put LED lights. And if you have the circles underneath those lights, that means that you can still recognize this as a modern interpretation of a 59 Cadillac Coupe DeVille, even if it's dark out. If you only see the rear lights of this car, you will still know that this is a Cadillac Coupe DeVille. Another thing that I wanted to change was the C-pillar. I wanted to add some thickness to it, some width to the C-pillar, just to make it look modern, and also, of course, safety features today. If you roll over, I'm not sure that the original 51 roof would hold the weight of this entire land yacht on. So restructuring the roof and the the C-pillar specifically was part of this redesign as well. And of course the wheels, I changed the wheel arches, just made them a little bit bigger, and that way the proportions doesn't seem so insanely crazy as the 59, where the wheel arches are very small in comparison to the rest of the body of the car. And also, if we want bigger wheels, we need to have a little bit more space to be able to fit them in there. Now, color. I did not know exactly what color I wanted. I love the red, but to me, if I wanted I want to have some really strong color on this redesign, and I went with orange. And the reason for that is I want the color of the car to be separated from the rear lights. And if we have a slight variation of red, in this case orange, that means that we're going to make the rear lights pop up a little bit more than if they were just red on red. Now I'm gonna let this redesign roll so you can see all the details and the process of making this redesign. I got a few comments asking me to slow the videos down so you can see the different layers and the whole process from going from a completely stock car into making this redesign in Photoshop. If that's not something that you're interested in, feel free to skip to the end, where I'm gonna come back and show you the before and after of this 59 Coupe DeVille redesign. there we have it. That's the redesign of the Cadillac Coupe DeVille from 1959. I hope you enjoyed it just as much as I enjoyed making this video. This was probably one of the most fun redesigns that I've made because it's such a different design. It's such a specific time of car design, the 50s. This kind of styling was not around for a long time, and it was all inspired by the jet era. When the jet airplanes came about, they wanted to implement that into the car design world, and try to take that and make it modern was a challenge, but definitely a lot of fun. I hope to see you in the next video. I'm the Sketch Monkey. Have a fantastic day. Thank you so much for watching this video.